My name is Sal, short for Salvatore, and I'm from Italy. My parents moved to the United Kingdom in the late 1960s. We had a popular Italian restaurant that not only supported my immediate family, but also extended to distant relatives, including many cousins. Though we're not always in each other's pockets, we're a close-knit family. We make an effort to gather for family events to avoid our beloved grandmother's disapproving gaze. She's the matriarch of our clan. 7 years ago, Connie, who always insisted on obedience, became my wife. We both decided to marry around the age of 30 after being in a relationship without a clear direction. Although it was satisfying in some ways, it lacked the elements needed for a long-term commitment. For almost 2 years, we enjoyed each other's company, attended parties, and had a great time before deciding to exchange vows. Unfortunately, my grandmother never fully accepted Connie, maintaining a tolerant attitude towards her. She was never openly rude, but there was always a look of disbelief in her eyes, as if she expected Connie to make a mistake. Where women get such intuition is a mystery to me. My grandmother had a tough time hiding her emotions from my wife, even though she never expressed her opinions in front of others. Just before our marriage, my grandmother warned me to keep an eye on Connie, expressing concerns about something bothering her. These words continued to echo in my head for unknown reasons. About a month ago, I discovered that my wife was secretly dating another man. They met regularly for at least 6 months, and I found out after a thorough investigation. Surprisingly, finding the truth wasn't as difficult as I expected. One evening, a small oversight on her part raised suspicions. It all started with a minor detail: a pen. A cheap, ordinary pen, usually given as a hotel souvenir. Its sudden appearance puzzled me, because I couldn't recall staying at the hotel from where she got it. I usually prefer well-known hotel chains about once a month, although I'm accumulating loyalty points, but they're not that great. One evening, while walking with Connie, I needed a pen. She rummaged in her big purse and pulled one out for me. However, after finishing writing, I noticed an inscription on the handle that caused a small alarm. I knew I hadn't stayed at the hotel, indicated on the pen, leading to my confusion. Without saying a word, I handed the pen back to Connie. Although seemingly insignificant, this small crack in our marriage could lead to significant consequences. Strangely, I chose to push it aside as we were meeting friends for a delightful evening over dinner, drinks, and dancing with 2 other couples. We found ourselves in the cozy lounge bar of our favorite restaurant just when the infamous pen made its significant move. It was a place where we always felt comfortable and could enjoy a relaxed atmosphere. Additionally, the restaurant owner was one of my cousins, allowing us a generous family discount. We reciprocated by expressing our support for the establishment. The discounts helped us strike the perfect balance between gratitude and not undermining the owner's authority, a mutually beneficial arrangement that worked harmoniously. The other couples present that evening were Carlo and his wife Joanna, as well as Phil and Terry. Carlo and Joanna were a bit older than us, about 5 years. Despite our distant relationship, we still considered ourselves a family. Carlo had somewhat old-fashioned behavior, and his life was quite interesting, although not entirely within the law. Despite his formidable personality, underneath the intimidating exterior was an incredibly kind and gentle person. You couldn't find a better person unless you managed to upset him. Just one piece of advice: don't. Carlo was like an older brother to me, always ready to support and be a reliable companion who knew how to keep me out of trouble. His wife Joanna was a charming woman who shared a deep love with Carlo, making them an ideal couple. She was not only beautiful, but also the only person who could intimidate Carlo, although he openly adored her without any doubt. I was fortunate to get to know Phil through work, and we immediately found a common language. We were the same age and had similar views on life. Sometimes we played golf together, and our friendship went beyond the golf course. Phil's wife Terry joined us during chats at the golf club, and everything seemed to be going well. It was noticeable that Terry and Connie got along well. Often they spent days on excessive shopping trips, buying everything in a row and spending what felt like an eternity on it. All I saw were the huge bags that Connie brought home after such outings. While Phil was consistently warm and friendly, Terry sometimes seemed distant, especially lately. But there came a moment when she suddenly joined the team completely. I often suspected something was wrong with her and repeatedly told Connie about it. However, she brushed it off, resorting to the typical excuses about women's problems when a woman doesn't want to share something. While we were in a comfortable area enjoying cocktails, Carlo and Joanna entered. I stood up to warmly greet them with hugs and kisses. A prompt waiter quickly brought new drinks to our table. Connie was always amazed at how well we were treated wherever we went, considering the 6 of us. My cousin efficiently directed us to our reserved table, our usual spot with both privacy and a view of the entrance. Carlo always preferred this window view, and although curious, we didn't ask why. Joanna inquired about Phil and Terry, mentioning she had talked to Connie earlier and knew they might be a bit late since Phil was not home yet. Observing the interaction between the 2 women, Carlo gave me a significant look. I met his gaze, but he subtly shook his head. Choosing to leave things as they were, I mentally noted to discuss this with Carlo later. After finishing our first drinks, Phil and Terry finally arrived, looking a bit flushed. Carlo watched them with an unfathomable expression. I noticed the familiar look again and wondered what Carlo knew. Something important was definitely happening. As we settled into our seats, we quickly delved into discussions about work, upcoming plans, and the usual talk about our families and children. After a delightful meal, we returned to the lounge area with music playing. At this point, the girls were eager to hit the dance floor. The 3 of us guys sat for a while, realizing our duty was to accompany them. Carlo took the lead and escorted Joanna back to our table after the first song. Glancing around, I noticed Phil and Terry still on the dance floor, but there was an awkwardness between them. I quietly asked Connie if they were okay. She replied, "I think so. Terry didn't talk about anything." A second look at her made me realize something was definitely wrong. Phil and Terry joined us at the table, but Terry quickly excused herself, saying she needed to go to the restroom. Carlo casually asked Phil if everything was all right. Phil calmly replied, "Yes, it's fine, just maybe a little too much." He signaled to pour more, and the waiter brought a new round of drinks before the women returned. The nonverbal signals revealed true feelings. Connie's gaze conveyed anxiety, and Carlo subtly nudged me, hinting at hidden knowledge. He winked, confirming he knew something important. To ease the tension, we continued changing partners for a few more dances. But as we prepared to leave, I noticed Connie talking to Phil at the other end of the hall. This extra detail of the evening didn't escape my notice. I thought about asking her later but changed my mind. After saying goodbye, we took separate taxis. Curiosity got the better of me and I couldn't resist asking about Phil and Terry the next day. "What happened to them?" I asked directly. She reassured me everything was fine, but as she looked out the window, I felt something was wrong. Not understanding what exactly was the matter, I decided to contact Carlo the next morning. That night, Connie tried to reassure me with closeness, reminding me of her love. However, an odd feeling persisted. Something was amiss, but I couldn't pinpoint it. "Darling, always remember that I love you too. You are my wife, and no one will ever separate us. I will never give you a reason to doubt it." Hugging her tightly, I showered her face with kisses, and we fell asleep. Yet the unusual events of that evening lingered in my mind. Realizing I needed to contact Carlo first thing in the morning, Connie went to the gym early the next day. Aimlessly wandering around, I drank refreshing orange juice, attempting to clear my clouded mind. Sitting at my laptop, I began searching for the hotel engraved on the pen handle in Connie's purse. After a thorough Google search, I discovered its location, conveniently close, but on the other side of London. I noted down contact details, and my skepticism led me to study the hotel's history for potential clues. Unfortunately, my investigation yielded nothing significant. I was ready to leave. I called Carlo, expressing my concern about Phil and Terry. The unease in my voice must have been apparent as I asked, "What's up with Phil and Terry? Should I be worried?" Carlo suggested meeting at his brother's bar at noon to discuss it face to face, urging me to come alone. Assuring him, I agreed, and the call ended, leaving me with a growing sense of anxiety. As the day unfolded, I shared my plans with Connie, assuring her it wouldn't take long. Her curiosity led her to inquire, "What does he want to say, Sal?" The concern in her eyes mirrored the growing unease I felt. A sense of foreboding accompanied me, as I drove to Carlo's house. Carlo greeted me and, without words, gestured for me to follow him. We navigated through the bar, entering utility rooms until we reached a secluded office-like space. As we sat on opposite sides of a large oak table, Carlo's solemnity was palpable. He began, "I promised your father I'd always protect you, and I intend to keep that promise. But what I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear." The pain in his eyes heightened my apprehension, and my thoughts raced, anticipating the revelation's gravity. Carlo handed me a large manila envelope, emphasizing the weight of the moment. "Sal, remember I'm here for you, okay?" The deliberate movements and the suffering in his gaze hinted at the seriousness of what lay inside. Opening the envelope, glossy photos unfolded, revealing my wife in different poses with another man in a shabby hotel room. Shocked, I could hardly process the sight before me. Carlo's voice broke through my awareness haze as my marriage unraveled before my eyes. Tears streamed down my face and I locked eyes with Carlo, desperate for answers. How? When? Who is he? The torrent of emotions, shock, fear, and anger, swirled within me, and I clung to Carlo's promise of support in the midst of this unexpected storm. Carlo stammered, his voice trembling as he informed me about Connie's suspicious actions. He had heard rumors a few weeks ago, but only gathered concrete evidence recently. Before our recent date, he discovered some unsettling details. According to him, Connie was spotted in a restaurant in South London with a man who seemed overly friendly. The familiarity between them suggested a connection to Tony Drew, Phil's brother. Recalling our night walk, Carlo pointed out the exchanged glances between Phil, Connie, and Terry, which now made sense. Confirming my suspicions, he mentioned seeing Connie's pen from a hotel in London. I inquired if it had happened there, and Carlo nodded in agreement. Expressing my determination, I told Carlo that my assistant had been monitoring their actions since the beginning of the previous week. I wanted to confront the man face to face, but Carlo cautioned against rash actions that could lead to serious consequences. He advised divorcing Connie and leaving him to handle the situation. Rejecting his suggestion, I insisted on handling it personally and wanted information on the man's residence, workplace, and other details. Carlo acknowledged having the information in the envelope, but stressed the importance of careful planning to avoid legal consequences. He proposed a strategic approach to eliminate any possibility of ending up in prison and asked for my agreement on the plan. It seems the person in question is currently single, but has been through a divorce. Even though he doesn't have kids, he seems to prefer women, especially those who are already married. Maybe he's not into commitments. What are your thoughts on this? How well do you get along with your friend Phil? I'm asking because he behaved oddly at the restaurant where Terry and your wife were. I've been keeping a close eye on him and suspect he might be aware of what's happening. If that's true, can we still consider him a friend? I noticed that too, and I'm starting to suspect his wife is involved in this. Judging by their behavior, I see no reason to continue being around them more than necessary. Sal, I think we should end this as soon as possible. If this was an isolated incident, I might not have paid attention, but after seeing it, I can't forget about it. It's all too overwhelming. Every time I see her, these images will haunt me. No, I can't forgive or forget. I understand. But in the current situation, you should prioritize your own protection. Taking the time to plan ahead will be helpful, even if it requires some patience. Trust me, you're going to need retribution. I informed Carlo that I needed time to carefully consider the situation, expressing my desire for both Phil and Connie to suffer. Leaning in, Carlo placed a business card in front of me, explaining that it belonged to an experienced specialist who was already informed about my situation. He encouraged me to call the specialist and convey what needed to be done, assuring me that he was also our cousin. Carlo chuckled at the connection between the specialist and our family. We had cousins everywhere, and I couldn't help but chuckle. We continued to discuss our plan for another hour until we decided on a course of action. I dialed Cousin Carl's number. We agreed to postpone its execution until all preparations are completed. Meanwhile, I had to find out the extent of Phil and his wife Terry's involvement in this situation. Leaving Carlo behind, I drove slowly back home. After parking the car, I went to the door, but there was no sound inside. Connie was not there. In the kitchen, I found a note on the table, indicating that she had gone to Terry. Understanding the message, I discarded the note and promptly contacted Carlo, informing him of Connie's claim. Despite her assertion, my surveillance revealed that Connie was currently at Phil and Terry's house, though Terry herself was absent. As mentioned earlier, I have someone keeping an eye on her, and he'll continue to do so. Later, 3 hours passed, and Connie finally returned home. Greeting me, she kissed my cheek and headed to the kitchen. When she inquired about my day, I mentioned Carlo's plan without divulging details, observing her expectation for more information. After a minute of anticipation, she asked about the discussion. I replied that it concerned a cousin's personal file, requiring permission, and involved suspicions about a wife's behavior, seeking advice. Noticing the change in her expression, I smiled, acknowledging her attempt to appear nonchalant. Nevertheless, I reassured her that everything would be resolved in the end. She turned away, and the rest of the weekend dragged on slowly. Despite the strong desire, I could not bring myself to make love to her. I couldn't help but look at the photos that Carlo shared with me, where she is captured with Tony. I was surprised how she could continue a relationship with him and still behave completely normally around me. She had an exceptional talent for deception and acting, far surpassing all my ideas. Saturday night passed without any major problems, but on Sunday night, her body language made it clear that she wanted closeness. I kissed her gently, but the image of her with Tony wouldn't leave my mind, making me doubt that she really could only be mine. It felt like a betrayal. We both lay in bed in silence, lost in our thoughts. As soon as she fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed and went downstairs. I was sitting at my computer, immersed in work, when a message from Carlo caught my attention. Looking at my watch, I realized that it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. Everything seemed to fall into place and completely coincided with our previous conversations. Feeling confident in my abilities, I came to the conclusion that now it remains only to plan a short trip with an overnight stay on Wednesday, and it will be possible to get down to business. I quickly replied to Carlo's message, confirming my agreement, but sleep did not come, and anger boiled inside. In the morning, after a quick shower, I got dressed and went downstairs. Connie greeted me with a warm smile and served me a delicious breakfast, coffee, and toast. She settled into her seat and sipped her coffee delicately. I mentioned that I had to go to Leeds on Wednesday, and as I spoke, her eyes met mine over the rim of her cup. Sensing her thoughts, she casually inquired if I would only be gone for one night. I affirmed, but added that I wouldn't return until late Thursday night. Her gaze intensified as she asked if this was related to Carlo and the cousin I had mentioned, suggesting he might need support. Expressing my unease about Carlo, I admitted uncertainty regarding the kind of help he could provide. Reassuringly, she mentioned that I might be surprised, highlighting Carlo's formidable problem-solving abilities. Observing her pale expression, I realized she was actively formulating a plan in her mind. Glancing at my watch, I stood up from my seat, signaling the start of the workday. It was time for me to leave. My dear, take care of yourself and behave while I'm away. I went to a meeting with a lawyer, discussed options for an hour, and signed necessary documents. The lawyer already has copies of the envelope contents. He assured me everything would be ready by Wednesday afternoon, confirming our agreement. I hurried to the bank, moved all our savings to a new account in my name. Additionally, I sent a significant amount to Carlo, asking him to hold it for me. I left the current account alone, covering our bills, and we had almost no extra money. I emptied our safe deposit box of cash and jewelry, opening a separate account only in my name at another bank. I also decided to stop her allowance, thinking it would put her in a tough spot by the end of the month. Happy with my day, I entered my office and went about my usual work. Sadie, my secretary, was an invaluable assistant, handling work competently, maybe even more so than me. During a momentary break in signing documents, I noticed Sadie looking at me. Turning my chair, I faced her. We've known each other for almost 5 years. She's always been professional and devoted, though tension with Connie seemed present. I believed it was related to gender issues. Looking into Sadie's worried eyes, I realized I could no longer ignore the situation. The desire to confide in someone became overwhelming, and she sensed my inner turmoil. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my thoughts and informed her about potential disruptions this week. I emphasized that if I couldn't be there, She knew what needed to be done to ensure everything ran smoothly. She assured me of her support. Curious if she could assist further, Sadie turned around. A refined and intelligent woman of about 40 whom I trusted implicitly. Confessing to her, I revealed that Connie was cheating on me. Clearly taken aback, Sadie expressed her disbelief and asked if I had concrete evidence. Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded in confirmation. Feeling my pain, Sadie hugged me tightly, providing the comfort and support that seemed absent at home. Tears streamed down for the first time since I received the devastating news a few days earlier. She held me until I regained my composure, looking into my tear-filled eyes and reassuring me of my goodness. She encouraged me not to let anyone tell me otherwise. Concerned about my future plans, she inquired about my intentions. Determined, I stated my decision to file for divorce and end the relationship completely. Despite my hesitation, I made it clear that I didn't want to involve her or anyone else. Worried, Sadie urged me to be careful and pleaded for a promise not to do anything rash. The rest of the day felt like a drag, each moment seeming like hard work. Sadie's devotion and support were invaluable, turning her into a precious friend who stood by me during this challenging time. Her husband, whoever he was undoubtedly lucky. She fearlessly protected me from any threats, dealing with them with her usual flair. I heard her push someone away with a stern warning, making me smile. I was pleased to have kind-hearted people like her by my side. When I got home, sitting with Connie and watching TV, the phone rang. She took it to the hallway to answer. Although I heard her speaking softly, the conversation remained unintelligible. After about 5 minutes, she returned. Curious, I inquired about the phone call. Connie dismissed it as unimportant, mentioning Terry discussing her claims and Phil initiating another pointless argument, with a hint of annoyance in her tone. I hope they find a way to reconcile. Sensing my confusion, I asked, "What do you mean? Are they in serious trouble?" Phil didn't say anything. Carefully watching her expression, I searched for signs that might reveal the truth. "Well," she began hesitantly, "it's not really a serious crisis, more of a small disagreement. I'm sure they'll sort it out." Suddenly it dawned on me. Is this really what happened? When we were in the restaurant, Connie looked at me nervously, not realizing I noticed the tension between them and her role in this. While spinning a web of lies, it became noticeable that Connie was entangled in her own deception. Despite her discomfort, I couldn't figure out Terry and Phil's role in this situation. I remembered their intense communication during our walk, an argument boiling all evening. "So that's what you talked to Phil about?" I asked, trying to figure out if she was trying to mediate. Connie's response was restrained and somewhat frank. "Yes, Terry asked me to talk to Phil, that's all." Intrigued, I continued to extract information. "What was it about, Connie? Perhaps I can help?" A smile appeared when I saw my wife struggle with the tangled web of lies. Sensing her anxiety, she calmed me down. "It's all right, Sal. I'm sure they are close to solving their problems," she offered optimistically. Expressing relief, I acknowledged the good news about my friend's improving marriage. However, a sudden anxiety prompted me to ask if he was cheating. Connie swiftly reassured me that there was nothing of that sort. My curiosity lingered, leading me to inquire if Terry might be cheating. Sensing my curiosity, Connie suggested not getting involved and letting them figure it out. Fully agreeing, I remarked that it was precisely what I had in mind. However, I mentioned that when I saw Phil, I might check to ensure he was okay. As I shifted my attention back to the TV, Connie's narrowed eyes signaled the end of our discussion. After a few minutes, I revisited the topic, questioning what the conversation was about if neither of them was cheating. Unable to resist, Connie abruptly left the sofa, visibly agitated, and hurried out of the room. I sat and chuckled to myself. By now I had enough information, but the other couple's role was still a mystery. The rest of the evening passed with mutual avoidance, and we both preferred silence to more discussion. Deciding to address the issue of Phil and Terry the next day, I woke up early. On Tuesday, I left the house just as Connie was coming down the stairs, still looking a little puzzled. "I have to move. Lots to do before I leave tomorrow," I told her without staying long and headed for the garage. As I moved, my thoughts returned to recent events. Until last week, everything was relatively calm. That changed when Connie met Tony a few months ago during a night out with Terry. They were in a small club with friends when Tony walked in, offered to buy everyone a drink, and caught the girl's attention. During that meeting, Terry noticed a connection between Tony and Connie. Worried, Terry expressed concern about Tony's character to her friend. She advised her to stay away from him, mentioning that he had made advances towards her in the past. In an attempt to calm Terry, Connie reassured her, stating that she had her phone with her, and noting that Tony was an attractive and smooth man. Terry shook her head, emphasizing her warning and urging Connie not to entertain the thought. Terry had done her duty as a protector, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something unsettling was behind Connie's eyes. The rest of the evening passed without any notable incidents, at least from Terry's point of view. Despite Terry's warning, Tony managed to get Connie's phone number. Over the next few days, Tony somehow got Connie's number and made several calls involving her in innocent conversations accompanied by light flirting. As the next bachelorette party approached, Connie realized that Tony would be attending again. This time there was dancing, and as soon as Tony took her in his arms, he began to use seduction tactics, showering her with flattery and compliments. He began numerous subtle touches while they were talking, leaving the club with Terry's worried friend, who scolded her and urged her to end it before something happened. Connie stubbornly kept silent, brushing off Terry's warnings and insisting that nothing had happened yet. But when Terry saw her, Tony just smiled resolutely, continuing to get his way, confident that he would eventually win Connie over. In the following weeks, phone conversations between Connie and Tony became more frequent, and their flirting intensified. Tony began to seriously pursue Connie. The dynamic changed when Terry was unable to join their usual night out, giving Tony the opportunity he had been waiting for. It was during one of their conversations that he saw a chance to make his move. Tony, using his charm, managed to convince Connie to meet him at the club, emphasizing that it would be a friendly relationship, nothing more. Connie thought about the idea, and seizing on a sudden opportunity, eagerly agreed to the meeting. Unlike her usual outfit for meeting Terry, Connie dressed up, feeling that this occasion had special meaning. Excitement bubbled in her veins, overcoming any doubts she may have had. She couldn't hide her joy, and she didn't want to, in her opinion. Talking to Tony created a connection, and she was ready for the next step. Without slowing down, she grabbed her purse and headed for the front door, unable to contain her excitement. That important evening marked the start of a new chapter in Connie and Tony's life. Their bond grew stronger, and meetings became more frequent. Their evening was filled with flirting, gentle touches, and playful dancing. Tony took her to his car and drove her to the Marriott Hotel. Believing Connie was ready for the next step, they spent the night together, their passion lasting until almost 1 o'clock in the morning. When Connie realized the time, panic set in. She quickly got ready and dressed, urging Tony to take her home. Despite Tony's agreement, the journey alone would have taken at least another 30 minutes. That night served as a wake-up call for Connie, and she started feeling uneasy. But in the following weeks, she continued dating Tony, unable to resist the temptation of their connection. During my absence, she stayed with Tony at the hotel, engaging in various activities. Terry advised Connie to stop before facing consequences. Weeks later, Terry discussed the situation with her husband Phil, hoping he could influence Tony. Terry explicitly asked Connie to stop and talk to Tony, seeking Phil's support. Phil was torn between loyalty to his brother and friend, making it increasingly difficult to find a solution without causing serious consequences. Connie knew their romance should end soon. She understood the risk she was taking increased the allure of continuing the illicit relationship. It was a dangerous game, and if anyone found out, chaos would follow. The recent restaurant incident, combined with leading questions, showed the situation was getting out of control. Connie understood Tony didn't have sincere feelings, considering her only as an opportunity. Despite this, she still felt drawn to him. Deciding that tomorrow would mark the last meeting, concluding the destructive cycle, Connie made up her mind, intending to end it after one final night together. Despite the decision, she still had to convince Tony. Late at night, legal documents from the lawyer were prepared in her car. Feeling tense, I sought solace in my trusted bottle of whiskey. Observing Connie, it was clear she grappled with her problems. When she inquired about my well-being, I didn't immediately respond. Instead, I turned to her, meeting her eyes to gauge her reaction. She seemed scared and anxious, evidently affected by the events of the past day. I muttered that it had been a tough day and mentioned the need to shower for the upcoming meeting with Carlo. The mention of Carlo appeared to disturb her, carrying a sense of horror. After the shower, I went downstairs, catching Connie's gaze in the kitchen. Casually asking about dinner, she suggested ordering takeout, expressing her reluctance to cook. I agreed, and we settled on Chinese cuisine. I called and placed the order, and while waiting, we sat in the living room with the TV on. Dinner passed quietly, almost in suspense. Connie casually inquired about my departure time the next morning, to which I explained my plan to leave around 9 in the morning for an 11 o'clock flight. I added that the issue couldn't be addressed until the evening, and it would be an opportunity to finally meet Cousin Carlo, trying to find a positive aspect in the current situation. Acknowledging the importance of family, Connie looked at me with a hint of sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was contemplating that tomorrow could mark the end of it all. The next morning, I woke up to the delightful smell of freshly brewed coffee, a scent I always appreciated at the start of the day. While I sipped hot coffee, which served as a magical elixir that fully awakened me, Connie was preparing breakfast. I sat down at the table and began to eat toast. My stomach still felt heavy from last night's dinner. Silence filled the kitchen. While we both enjoyed coffee, a calm atmosphere prevailed. We exchanged fleeting glances, but quickly averted our eyes to avoid giving ourselves away. The atmosphere was tense, and we both wanted it to be over. Checking my watch, I realized it was time to leave. Urgently, I mentioned that I had to go and pick up Carlo from home. As I passed Connie, she looked at me with a smile and wished me a safe journey and a speedy return. Moving forward, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders and tears welled up in my eyes. With a deep sigh of relief, I turned the steering wheel and drove away from my wife, deciding not to look back. My face was flooded with tears, and my heart was heavy with grief. It was a day of reckoning, the culmination of it all. A few minutes later, Connie picked up the phone and listened to the beeps in her ear. She whispered that I was gone and asked if the plan could still proceed that night. The response was affirmative, with assurances of making the night unforgettable. Connie explained that she had convinced Phil to leave them alone and shared that he was becoming increasingly upset with her. She inquired if he had mentioned anything to me, and the answer was affirmative, but she had instructed him to mind his own business. Despite the challenges, she expressed eagerness for the night ahead and shared the arrangements for their meeting at the same room as last time. Ending the call, the man couldn't help but smile. He quickly composed a text message with the details of the lovers' date, collected his listening equipment, and left the place of observation. Carlo looked at the message, a grim smile appearing on his face. He expressed concern about the situation and questioned my certainty about it. I assured him of my love for Connie and my determination to make her understand the gravity of her actions, even if it meant enduring lasting consequences with her lover. With some time before the action started, we decided to have a snack. Carlo dissuaded me from reaching out to Terry and Phil, emphasizing the potential legal consequences if they became aware of my awareness. He assured me that there would be time to address that later and asked me not to worry. Leaving the bar, I was introduced to Carlo's brother Alfredo and his daughter Alicia. Alfredo apologized for his daughter's impulsive nature and explained that they can be assertive these days. Expressing understanding, I greeted Alfredo warmly, emphasizing the importance of family. Alfredo smiled and conveyed his regards to his wife and the rest of his family. A little after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, an incoming call signal was heard on the mobile phone. Glancing at the screen, I noticed that it was Connie. I greeted her and asked what had happened. She explained that she called to ensure I had arrived safely and inquired if everything was okay. I assured her that we were both fine and mentioned that we were having a late lunch before continuing on our way. Curious about her evening plans, I asked about her intentions, subtly concealing my true agenda. She mentioned that she was going to visit Terry and believed everything was fine there. I responded, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Continuing the conversation, I casually mentioned that I was planning to call Phil later, as I believed he was going out with his brother. Expressing curiosity about Phil's brother, I inquired about his personality. Connie offered a vague response, mentioning that she had only met him once but found him to be somewhat similar to Phil. With a brief farewell, I explained that we needed to check into the hotel before our evening meeting, wishing her a pleasant evening and asking her to say hello to Terry. Ending the call, I looked at Carlo, and he sensed the hidden pain in my expression. He offered his support, acknowledging that it was done, and suggested we go meet the others. Leaving Alfredo at the bar, we proceeded to the private rooms, where Carlo introduced me to a group of 4 people familiar to him. He assured me of their trustworthiness, emphasizing that they had proven themselves countless times in the past. At that moment, Carlo's phone rang, and after answering the call, he nodded, relaying the message that we would be leaving in 5 minutes. Observing my watch, I noticed it was already 8 o'clock. Time was slipping away fast. The guys left the room and headed to the waiting car. They grabbed a minibus to reach their destination. At the same time, Carlo and I went out the back door and hopped into the prepared Mercedes. This is how my story brought me to where I am now. We parked the Mercedes on a quiet street, just 200 meters from the hotel. In silence, we sat there, and by 9 o'clock in the evening, Carlo's phone signaled a message. After confirming the team's arrival and placement, we stayed silent until another message appeared on Carlo's phone, indicating that the exit was guarded. "Okay, let's go," Carlo said, breaking the silence. After a moment, I followed suit, and we headed for the hotel lobby. Time seemed to have sped up. My heart raced with anticipation. Carlo got out of the car first and directed me to the indicated room number. Reaching door 415, a feeling nagged at me that my wife might be behind it with another man. Just as we reached the door, 4 men in hotel-style uniforms seemed to appear out of nowhere. Glancing around the corridor, relieved it was empty, Carlo warned about the nearby CCTV cameras. Leading the team into the bedroom, Carlo's determined eyes met mine. The lights turned on, revealing a scene that left my heart sinking. From my vantage point, I could see my wife in bed with Tony, oblivious to the impending intrusion. The details of what happened to her lover are hard to convey in this context. Everything unfolded in a whirlwind of emotions. Turning on the light, I entered the room. My wife, lying on the bed, locked eyes with me. Shuddering, she tightly shielded herself, tears streaming down her face. Muffled sobs and unintelligible mutterings escaped her mouth. Love and hate collided, and rage took the forefront among the overwhelming feelings. Carlo stepped forward, gripping my arm and gently taking an object from my hand. His determined eyes met mine, urging me to calm down and gain control of my emotions. At this moment, Connie, consumed by fear, stared at the 2 imposing figures in front of her, shaking her head vigorously. Tears streamed down her face as she remained wordless, intensifying the destruction of her evening. Sensing it was time to leave, I observed a subtle movement from Carlo, who was checking his phone. He mentioned that it was time for us to depart. Following him out of the room and leaving Connie behind, Carlo remarked that I had handled the situation well. He added that, for a moment, he thought I might lose control of my anger. I responded with a grim laugh, assuring him that so far, it was just a good scare. I explained that the real lesson would be when she meets Tony again, and that there was no need for me to get my hands dirty since the guys would handle him properly. Carlo understood my desire for Tony to know I was there, but assured me that he wouldn't forget the experience anytime soon. As we walked through dimly lit streets towards our destination, Carlo mentioned that rooms were ready for both of us when we were ready. We entered the bar where Alfredo awaited us. Approaching 1 o'clock in the morning, Carlo's phone beeped with a message confirming that everything was settled. Expressing my gratitude for what they did, I started to muse. But Carlo interrupted me, stating that it was over and I needed to figure out the situation with her. Understanding his point, no further words were exchanged. The weight of the situation pressed on me as we left her at the hotel. I wondered how she would find her way home and what she would say about this unexpected turn of events. Now aware that I knew about her actions, would she admit to them or remain silent? Despite catching her in the act, I doubted she would willingly confess. Carlos's words brought me back. Rooms are prepared for both of you when you are ready. Unable to sleep, I replayed the events of the previous night in my mind, thinking through every detail. Thoughts of Connie filled my mind, and a heavy sadness settled within me. She was the love of my life, my everything, and now it's all been destroyed. The only way left was to face her and see how this would unfold. Divorce papers were already in my hands, with the official copy supposed to be delivered today. Returning home, she wouldn't have doubts about what I knew. A chilling thought crossed my mind. What if she doesn't come home? Uncertainty added complexity to an already turbulent situation. Now that she knew I caught her at the hotel, Connie would likely be afraid to return home. I realized I needed to take measures, possibly rescheduling the delivery of the divorce papers to where she could find refuge, maybe with Terry. Almost 7 hours had passed, and Alicia abruptly woke me, informing me it was lunchtime and that I had 30 minutes. Carlo mentioned I had to catch an afternoon flight, so it was time to get up. Getting dressed, I saw a changed version of myself in the mirror, bearing the weight of recent events and signs of change. Sitting down with the others at the table, I sensed that the feeling of normality had turned surreal, yet oddly comforting. We shared a meal, talked, and even laughed, but time passed too quickly, and it was soon time to leave. Gathering our belongings, we headed to the waiting car. As we drove away, I gazed out the window, bidding farewell to the faces watching us. On the way home, I drove steadily and calmly. I dropped off Carlo, and Joanna welcomed him with joy, hugging him tightly, like newlyweds. She then turned to me, offering a tight hug for comfort. Carlo reassured me, expressing his belief that everything would eventually be fine. Despite my speechlessness, his comforting hug offered a glimmer of hope. Departing with a plan to call later, I nodded in confirmation and drove home, attempting to avoid dwelling on empty thoughts. Upon reaching my front door and entering, an eerie silence pervaded the house. The heating provided warmth, but the cozy atmosphere was absent. With cautious steps, I explored the living room and kitchen, noting the emptiness and quietness. Checking my mobile phone, I found no calls or messages from Connie. Overwhelmed with disappointment and sadness, I sank into a chair in the living room. A photo of Connie and me on the mantel caught my eye, sparking anger. I impulsively threw the framed photo across the room. As it crashed against the wall, the phone rang. With apprehension and curiosity, I answered the call, still carrying a residual tone of anger. "Hello?" I responded. A hesitant female voice on the other end identified herself as Terry. Despite my harsh tone, she inquired about Connie, revealing that Connie was with her, upset and afraid to go home. Suppressing anger, I asked Terry to let Connie talk to me. Advising Terry to ask Connie about the events, I listened as the conversation unfolded. After a while, Terry returned to the phone, expressing genuine concern for Connie, who remained silent. Instructing Terry to tell Connie that I would pick her up, I heard Connie scream, confirming my suspicions. Terry, uncertain of what to say, stammered, and I calmly acknowledged that I knew everything. Apologizing, Terry shared the unsuccessful attempts to stop the events with Phil. Expressing my sadness over the situation, I mentioned the impact on our friendship, but suggested avoiding further discussion. In response, Terry whispered an understanding acknowledgement and apologized once again. I took a deep breath, attempting to find some semblance of completeness in the midst of turmoil. With gratitude, I thanked Terry, acknowledging that our once strong friendship had been irreparably changed by the actions of those involved. Ending the conversation, I informed Terry that I wouldn't be coming for Connie. Advising her to relay the message, I sternly instructed Terry that Connie's belongings would be packed and ready for her to collect, with a warning that any delay would result in disposal. Emphasizing that Connie no longer lived with me, I mentioned that some papers for her would be delivered to my address. Urging caution in any actions or attempts to contact me, I stressed the need for careful consideration. Clearly and with strength, I spoke to Terry, laying out all the details and emphasizing that I haven't heard from Connie since around 7:30 p.m. I anticipated some reaction after she received the documents, but according to Terry, she appeared very nervous when she arrived at their house. Carlo, finding humor in the situation, grinned. Thinking about the upcoming day, I mentally listed tasks that needed attention. First, contacting my office to clarify work matters, then dealing with a locksmith, addressing banking issues, and handling logistics. Painful as it was to admit, the trust we once shared had completely vanished. Remaining in this relationship after the divorce papers were delivered last night was impossible. I expected to hear from Connie today once she gathered her thoughts, but it was already 9 when a knock interrupted my thoughts. Upon opening the door, I found Terry and Phil standing there, their unexpected presence casting a shadow in the room. Waiting in silence, Terry eventually spoke, expressing remorse for their actions. Acknowledging their request to come in, I gestured them to the living room. As they settled on the sofa, I took a chair, bracing myself for the necessary conversation. Curious, I asked, "So what did you guys want to discuss?" Paying close attention to Terry and Phil, I listened as Phil began with an apology, admitting his failure to inform me about Connie's extramarital pursuits. Terry echoed his sentiments, expressing regret for being unable to reach Connie and prevent her actions. While their words evoked a sense of offense and betrayal, I recognized the sincerity behind their apologies. Wanting clarity, I questioned Terry about her statement that Connie didn't understand anything. Confused and concerned, I asked, "What do you mean, Terry? I was away on Wednesday, and when I called, Connie mentioned being left by Tony at a hotel. Are you suggesting something happened between them?" Phil, filled with concern, replied, "We're not certain. We tried contacting my brother, but there's been no response. Connie is unable to provide much information. All she said was that she felt tied up and Tony had left her at the hotel." The growing anxiety within me intensified as I struggled to comprehend the events between Connie and Tony. Pressing for more details, I directed my disappointment toward Phil. "Come on, Phil," I urged. "She must have shared more than that. What happened? Clearly something went wrong. Did he misuse her?" Phil and Terry exchanged surprised glances, taken aback by the intensity of my anger. Summoning my strength, I redirected the conversation. I inquired about Connie's well-being after the delivery of the divorce papers. Terry affirmed this, describing Connie's emotional turbulence and the new outburst triggered by the documents. Connie's state of confusion and imbalance deeply affected her, intensifying my anger and fear for what traumatic events she might be withholding. Expressing my frustration, I asserted, "Well, she brought this upon herself. If she's hurting now, then so be it." Terry and Phil, taken aback by my intense anger, attempted to reason with me. Terry, with a cracking voice, urged me to consider reconciliation, emphasizing the severity of divorce and suggesting talking to Connie first. As I listened to Terry's plea, my anger began to wane, replaced by conflicting emotions. The decision ahead demanded careful consideration and open communication. Recognizing Terry's sincere concern as that of a true friend, I admitted to liking her. Despite their involvement, Terry's words compelled a serious approach. Deep down, I acknowledged that facing Connie was inevitable. Taking a deep breath, I decided, "All right, Terry, I will talk to her, but only after her belongings are removed from our house. It will be just her and me. I'll call her and provide details about when and where this conversation will take place. How does that sound?" Terry, overwhelmed with emotion, hugged me tightly, and I noticed Phil's confused and regretful expression. Expressing gratitude to Terry for her understanding, I assured her, "Thank you, Terry. I will contact her soon. Please ask her to wait for my call and don't worry. I won't leave her in limbo for long." Phil, conveying regret, muttered sympathetically, "Sal, I'm sorry. My brother certainly deserved a good thrashing from you. I wouldn't blame you if you did." Observing Terry and Phil leave from the window, their hurried departure indicated their destination, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Lost in thought, I contemplated Terry's words, realizing there was some truth in them. It was time to talk to Connie, and this conversation could no longer be postponed. Feeling detached from the current situation, I sought solace in a conversation with my longtime friend Sadie. Our discussion lasted for half an hour, during which I attentively listened as Sadie shared details of her successful life without my presence. She truly was an extraordinary woman. When she touched on Connie's topic, her tone changed to that of a concerned mother. It felt like listening to my own mother's lectures. In the end, Sadie insisted I have dinner at her house tonight with her husband. Feeling somewhat obligated, I reluctantly agreed to her request. The rest of the day involved various changes. Locks were replaced, rooms were rearranged, clothes were packed or discarded, and photos were reorganized or destroyed. Each action symbolized moving forward and parting with the past. As evening approached, I found myself lost in thought, gazing out of the window and contemplating the task that lay ahead. Understanding the need to gather my strength for what awaited, I decided to postpone making the call until the morning, feeling a sense of weariness. Another restless night followed, offering no relief from the weight of anxious thoughts. In the early morning, just before 7:30, an unexpected call disrupted the silence. Phil's voice came through, delivering news about Tony's condition. Apparently, Tony had been in the hospital for several days, injured but in stable condition. The news had a minimal effect on my emotions, and my response carried a cold detachment. I made it clear to Phil that I harbored no sympathy for Tony, stating, "I hope you don't expect sympathy from me, Phil. As far as I understand, he was lucky that our paths did not cross. I don't have the slightest desire to show him any respect." Phil seemed to accept the frankness of my words and acknowledged the justified anger I felt towards Tony. He refrained from asking certain questions, recognizing the depth of my emotions. Expressing remorse for not being as good a friend to me as I had been to him, Phil conveyed his understanding of the irreparable past. I reassured him that it was not his fault and expressed gratitude for informing me about Tony. After bidding farewell and expressing love to Terry, Phil concluded the call. Placing the phone back on the stand, I turned my attention to the view outside the window, contemplating the garden, enjoying the silence, and reflecting on the unfolding events. A calm atmosphere enveloped me as I observed random birds flying to the feeder and feasting on the seeds I happily supplied them. Watching the serene communion with nature through glass always brought me a sense of calm. It was at such moments, immersed in the beauty of the natural world, that my thoughts could flow freely. Dialing Carlo's number on my mobile phone, I shared the news about Tony. His response was brief, but filled with a sense of satisfaction. He noted that the work was done well. Setting the phone aside, I took a sip of the coffee in my hand, relishing the aromas of the day. Soon, the phone rang again, disrupting the peaceful atmosphere. This time, I decided to let the answering machine handle it. Listening carefully, I heard Connie's trembling voice, leaving a message filled with uncertainty and emotion. "I'm sorry, but I have to explain. I need you. I need to get home. I'm so sorry." Connie's desperate plea echoed in the voicemail. Sobs interrupted her words, penetrating my soul and making my heart ache in my chest. Each tearful phrase caused a shockwave of emotions, leaving me breathless. When the message ended, I felt that I was breathing heavily, and contradictory thoughts were spinning in my head. I knew that today I would have to solve this situation, but I wanted her to wait so that she would understand that my decision was made not only in response to her message, it has to be a carefully thought-out decision. For the next few hours, I wandered aimlessly around the house, lost in deep thought. The once familiar rooms now seemed empty, emphasizing the emptiness that had formed after Connie's absence. In place of her belongings, there were voids that served as a visual reminder of our life together. I contacted Sadie and asked for help from several people with a van to move all of Connie's things. Within an hour, the boxes and bags I packed were neatly loaded into the back of the van. I watched the car pull away, setting off to return Connie's things. Soon, I was expecting my phone to buzz with a notification about the delivery of things. This meant the final completion of the one-way trip. At the final stage of our life together, Terry called to inform me about Connie's belongings. I expressed brief gratitude for the organization, feeling a sense of completeness. Terry updated me, mentioning that they stored most items in the warehouse, keeping only the ones I marked as personal. Asked whether I would talk to Connie, I firmly instructed Terry to call her. As I awaited Connie's response, my tone remained controlled but firm. When I spoke to her, I interrupted her attempt to apologize, stating, "Leave it alone, Connie. Now you have answers to questions you never asked yourself when you were busy with other things." Despite her desperate pleas, I made it clear that we had nothing more to discuss, firmly stating, "This is where our journey ends. Do you really think you can tell me anything to help me deal with this?" Connie continued to plead, asking to come home and talk. Prepared to listen, though unable to promise anything, I responded with fatigue in my voice, "I'll listen, but I can't promise anything." I concluded the conversation, carrying the weight of her words in my memory. Her voice held pain, and I wondered if she could sense the suffering in mine. Leaning back in my chair, I reflected on our marriage and the happiness I thought we shared. Doubt crept in, questioning how well I knew her and whether my assumptions about our relationship were too idealistic. Delving into introspection, I realized I may still have a lot to learn about the person I thought I knew closely. Although I didn't suspect anything until that fateful night, it dawned on me that Connie might have engaged in similar behavior. Before taking a deep breath, I decided to approach the upcoming meeting with restrained emotions, mentally preparing for what might be the last act of our marriage. The doorbell announced Connie's arrival, and nervously opening the door, time seemed to stop. It was our first meeting after that solemn night at the hotel, and the shock resonated within me. As she entered the living room, a thin sigh escaped her lips, replaced by a strangled sob. She noticed the empty spaces on the walls, devoid of photos and cherished souvenirs that once adorned our life together. Standing in front of me, covering her mouth with her hand, tears welled in her eyes. I stated coldly, bitterness in my voice, informing Connie that everything was gone, pointing out the emptiness throughout the house. As Connie expressed confusion, I reiterated that I never wanted this to happen. She pleaded, her voice shaking with remorse, and I acknowledged that her actions had consequences, the result of her infidelity, extramarital affair, and connection with another man. In the ensuing silence, Connie sat down on the sofa. With a stern expression, I pressed her to speak. She apologized, expressing regret and admitting her inability to resist, describing it as a dependency. Struggling with emotions, I wondered if there was still room in my heart for forgiveness. I then revealed that I had talked to Terry and Phil, gaining a fuller understanding of what happened and expressing frustration with the lack of clarity on why it happened. She shifted uncomfortably, looking down at her feet, admitting that she couldn't answer why she got involved with the new and exciting person. I argued about the undeniable fact that she slept with him consistently, expressing my resentment and disappointment over the course of several weeks. Connie, laden with guilt, acknowledged that she messed up and expressed a desire to find a way to move past it. Changing the topic, I inquired about the whereabouts of the person she was involved with. Connie denied referring to him as her lover, explaining that she went on dates with him, but emphasizing her love for me and apologizing tearfully for her terrible mistake. Listening to her plea, anger boiled inside me as I questioned her sincerity and trustworthiness. I pointed out her deceitful actions and questioned why I should believe anything she said. Connie, recognizing the extent of my pain and betrayal, continued crying, realizing the precarious state of our relationship. Demanding to know if I had communicated with my counterpart, I harshly questioned her, waiting for her answer. She tearfully revealed that she hadn't heard anything about him and expressed her reluctance to know more, considering him the one who ruined her life. Noticing the missing wedding photo, Connie walked around the room, observing the void left by the absence of memories. Emotionally drained, she sank onto the sofa, acknowledging the irreversible loss. The silence between us reflected the vast gap created by her actions. Pleading for a chance and expressing a note of defeat, but hope in her eyes, Connie asked if there was really no chance for reconciliation. Taking a deep breath, I met her gaze, conveying a mix of suffering and resilience. Declaring that her betrayal shattered my heart and constituted disrespect for our feelings and those of our friends, I asserted that our marriage was over. I left her to face the consequences of her choices, urging her to sign the divorce papers and leave. Expressing finality and fatigue, I stated that everything ended with her, instructing her to leave my house and the city for peace. Sitting dejectedly, Connie absorbed my words and slowly stood to leave. I followed her to the door, watching as she opened her car door. When she looked back and apologized, mixed emotions stirred in me. Closing the door, I sealed not only her exit, but also the end of our marriage. 2 days later, Carlo informed me that Connie had left the country, escorted by his people, realizing she wouldn't find peace in the city.